Welcome back to the dog house. Here we are in my own little private office, just having a good time, and I thought I would share with you some stories of growing up. Years ago, when I went off to college, my old grandpa sent me in. He was excited about me going to school. He just couldn't wait till I got off. So, I went off to college, and of course, they sent me a little money, but they never send you enough money. And I had enough money to live in the dorms, maybe enough money to go eat in the cafeteria and buy a soda pop, but that was about it. Wasn't enough for my favorite lifestyle. So I called home. They give me a little more, but they began to gripe. So I come up with a plan. I called Grandpa. I told him, I said, now, Papa, I said, you know how smart these people are up here in college. And I said, these folks are bright. And I said, there's a guy up here that says if we'll bring old Blue, the hound dog, up here, that he can teach that dog to read. And my papa said, teach him to read? Well, he just couldn't believe it. And I said, yeah, Papa, I teach him to read. Well, he said, well, what's that going to cost? I said, well, he said he'd do it pretty cheap. He'd do it for $200. Papa said, well, that sounds like a deal. He said, son, we'll get the dog up there and we'll get the money to you. So sure enough, the old dog come in on the train, had the money with it. I had a good time, took care of old Blue, run out of money again. So I called home. I said, Papa, I said, we got a problem. I said, old Blue's learned to read. I said, he's reading magazines, he's reading books, reading newspapers, just going wild. But the problem is that he can't tell anybody what he's read. Papa said, no. I said, yeah. He said, well, what are we going to do? I said, well, there's a guy that's even smarter than the first guy. And he said for $500, he'll teach that dog to talk. Papa said, man, you mean I'd have an old hound dog that could read and talk? I said, yeah. He said, well, son, he said, the money's on the way. Well, man, I had a good time that semester and got down towards the end, had to go home. I got real worried about what I was going to do. Sure enough, the train rolls in down home, and Papa comes out and got his new suit on. All his buddies with him come down to see that dog that could read and that could talk. Well, people got off the train, and Papa stood there a minute, and I didn't get off. Dog didn't get off. A minute, he seen me way up on the end, and I got off, and I was just a-crying and wringing my hands, and Papa walked up, and he said, son, he said, what's going on? I said, well, Grandpa, I said, it's just terrible. He said, well, tell me what happened. I said, well, we was crossing that trestle back up there. And I said, old Blue is sitting over there reading the paper and talking to me about the news. And I said, he put that paper down. And he said, son, he said, I just can't wait to get home and see your grandma. I said, well, what do you want to talk to Grandma about? He said, well, he said, you know how your grandpa's so guilty of womanizing all the time. Said, I run with him. I know everything he did. And said, I'm going to tell your grandma. I looked at Papa and I said, Papa, before I know what happened, I said, here he had hunted with us and run with us and gonna betray you like that. And I said, I just snapped. I grabbed him by the collar, slung him out the window there on that trestle. I said, he hit the post and went head over heels down the edge in that gully. And I said, I reckon he's dead. Papa looked at me a minute and he said, son, he said, tell you what. He reached in his coat pocket and he pulled out his pistol and handed it to me. He said, you walk back up there at that trestle, crawl down in that ditch, and said, you make double sure that lying dog is dead.